Hello, everyone, and welcome back to TMS number 20, our big 20th episode ever. And today we have the pleasure of welcoming a very special guest. He was the traveling press secretary for Andrew Yang on the campaign trail and is now the spokesman for both Andrew and Evelyn Yang. He is also the founder of United Public Affairs and even runs his own Dr. Fauci merchandise line. Erick Sanchez, welcome to the show.
Matt, thank you for having me on, man. It's so great to see your face again, and I hope you're doing well and staying healthy and staying with everything going on.
Absolutely, I am. It's good to see you as well. And before we get into the weeds about anything, I have to ask you about this Dr. Fauci merch line.
For sure.
I understand you started a few months ago with pillows. You've now expanded into not only T-shirts but baby onesies of all things. But apparently the brand's actually catching on. Like you see articles about it in like mainstream newspapers, and it's getting press. And also all the profits from it, from what I understand, go to help support coronavirus relief efforts. How did you get the idea to put Dr. Fauci's face on a pillow and donate the money?
This was awesome. So it was actually Cinco de Mayo. I had some neighbors over, and the four of us, we were just having. I'm trying to remember what the discussion was exactly, but we were talking about Dr. Fauci's significance in this period. And my friend Marin was like, I think it'd be really funny to have a memento. And she had the name Fauci on the couch as like an alternative to Elf on the Shelf or Mensch on the Bench. And I slept on it. And the next morning I was like, that does actually sound like a pretty good idea. And at least folks who've been buying it consider it to be kind of like a memento to this, really strange period, and certainly for him, I'm sure he appreciates a little bit of the attention, but mostly he's kind of been set on offering the actual sound advice, while the Trump administration is not really taking a whole lot of it, obviously, given they're having a large scale rally tomorrow in Tulsa. So but it's been fun. And also World Central Kitchen, which is run by Chef Jose Andres. Back when I was living in DC, I applied some public pressure when he was deciding to whether or not to open up a restaurant in Trump's DC hotel. This was back in 2015, back when no one thought Trump had a chance of really getting beyond, Iowa or New Hampshire. And for my part, it was easy to recognize that he was going to be playing an evil role. And of course, there's the website, FauciOnTheCouch.com, if anybody should be interested. But yeah, I mean, the cause is fantastic. Obviously, Jose Andres now has done a lot for both coronavirus relief, has been very vocal during the protests as well, but has done really excellent work around the world around disaster relief. So, happy to show some appreciation their way. But it's been a fun project, of course. It's certainly been something to keep me occupied after the campaign.
Yeah, that's what I was saying. It's quite the post-campaign pivot,
Well, some of us, start huge nonprofit operations, and other of us just start, a simple pillow apparel line.
I love that it seems like no matter who it is in the Yang Gang, everyone seems to have kind of gone off in a different direction, but it's all an entrepreneurial direction. And Andrew always said, the Yang Gang is just a big group of entrepreneurs. So it's cool to see.
Yeah. And you know what? I think if anything, it's probably mostly fostered by him and his spirit and instilling like these values of a hard work ethic rooted by that. And honestly, through osmosis, I feel like so many of us adapted that and then decided to, use it towards good, fun, interesting projects. And I certainly attribute all that to just observing Andrew's work ethic, of course.
Mm-hmm. Besides the Fauci or Fauci on the couch pillow line, what else have you been up to since the campaign ended? I know that you're the founder, as mentioned in the intro, of this company, United Public Affairs. What is United Public Affairs?
So United Public Affairs is really a labor of love. Like it's so I founded it along with Randy Jones, who is our political director. Our deputy press secretary, Hillary Kinney, is our CEO. I mean, we were fortunate enough to bring together, and obviously Conrad Taylor, even though he has an official role with Humanity Forward, is a part, as is Shelby Summerfield, who was our director of advance as well. So, it's a very Yang Gang heavy firm, but what we're always hoping to do is kind of create something as kind of a wing to take all the lessons we learned. Certainly, even coming off the campaign, reporters would point to the fact of the remarkable success of Andrew, and even more so now, ironically enough, since the campaign's been over. So, we built this firm as a way to really represent the causes and, the candidates that we really support. We've been grateful to work with some of the Yang Gang endorsed candidates like Russ, who you had on recently. And certainly, we want to take kind of the machine and apparatus that helped elevate Andrew's, platforms and positions and put it towards some of the causes that we see run parallel to that operation. So, and we're obviously grateful to have Andrew's support and have Andrew and Humanity Forward and everyone as clients to, be helpful in terms of navigating this really weird terrain.
Mm-hmm. That's amazing. Would you say the organization is kind of working independently of Humanity Forward or more in tandem with Humanity Forward?
It's funny because I feel like, given the amount of campaign alumni that are now with Humanity Forward, including two of our associates, it's kind of working in tandem. And, obviously, I think it's great to be able to work with familiar faces, especially since I feel like in a lot of ways, Humanity Forward took off a lot earlier than anyone had anticipated. Certainly, there was a lot longer timeline towards things like offering stimulus payments, doing a large scale UBI pilot. But all of that, obviously, with the rise of coronavirus, it all got thwarted. And I mean, it's crazy because literally after we wrapped up the campaign, Andrew didn't take time off, Zach didn't take time off, John Liu, Ethan Dunn, Justina Sullivan, they all went back to New York and got to work building Humanity Forward. And it was completely serendipitous in terms of like the hustle they put on to get that off the ground, because as soon as they were done, people needed money. So
it was good timing.
Yeah, it was good timing. And certainly it's like, the way Andrew looks at it, he's obviously not happy that that things took the course. I mean, he's definitely not, thumping his chest in victory that people are taking the concept of UBI more seriously. But, obviously he's glad that he can at least offer guidance and put those pieces together. Now, at least initially there was a big wave, and I hope that it comes again, because I mean, there's, the one-time payments of $1,200 and $2,400, but I have a feeling that people already need more.
Yeah, they definitely do. And one thing somebody brought up on the show last week is how once the unemployment benefits they're scheduled to end in July, and then also all the rent freezes and mortgage freezes, there's going to be kind of this squeeze that happens, and suddenly nobody's going to be able to pay any of their bills.
Right.
So.
Yeah. And, different localities have taken up different measures, and some of them have offered grace periods. My brother lives in Austin, and he had a rent grace period for a bit, but they're supposed to be rolling that back. But I'd have to imagine, I mean, it's clear that there's going to be a second surge of the virus.
Yeah, it seems so. I think Arizona today had something like 3,500 new cases, which is just incredible to think. If you rank that in terms of if it were its own country, it'd be in like the top 5 worldwide in terms of just cases. Like, whoa.
Yeah, and it's the funny thing is, I was talking to a friend earlier, and it seems like now the loyal Trump base is looking at the refusal of wearing masks is almost like a way to show pride for Trump's administration, because he's not doing it. And I'm thinking to myself, like, it's not. This isn't a political issue. This is an actual medical issue. It's like not like wearing a MAGA hat, where that's just something that's fashionable for them to do, or wearing a math hat, which was fashionable for us to do. But it's like this is an actual situation. And I recall, so my wife and I, obviously we live in New Orleans, and we went to see some friends in a really COVID-friendly setting in Panama City Beach, which is like one of those Trump stronghold cities. And so their family has a house there. We went out on their boat, and you pass all these beach bars and other things. And these beach bars were just packed, and like there was like Trump flags everywhere, and there were, boats out in the water with Trump flags hanging off of them, with like 20 people just kind of socializing. And it appeared that like everything that's going on just doesn't exist.
Yeah, it's weird. It's like looking back at a different universe when you just see clips on Twitter of people like partying up like there's no virus spreading around. It's weird.
It's wild. And I get it. It's like, after so much time, I know we're all going stir crazy, and certainly, with a void of the comforts we're used to, whether it's pop culture or concerts or sports or whatever, with the absence of all that, I can get the irritability, but I think, at the same time, our mayor here implemented more strict rules than the rest of the state, and we've benefited from it as a result. We've seen a decrease in cases.
Mm-hmm.
But, I worry as things are kind of scaling, and as tourists will, come back in as things are opening, we'll probably just see that spike all over again.
Yeah, it's unfortunate. And I think just the fact that we can't even get like every American on board with wearing masks, and it's became this political issue, just kind of exposes a lot of the cracks just with our institutions, whether it be the government, the media, the parties. It's just kind of all discombobulated to get to the point where we are now. That's kind of just it's like, dang, really,
Yeah, well, there's also been a ton of misinformation, and
yep.
That's why it's like, I'll take my guidance from someone like Fauci, because he's been doing this for decades. He gets it. And, I feel like in a large part, the unfortunate consequence of the, political ping pong that's happened with coronavirus, it's like, there's a faction of folks that are just refusing to take good advice because, leadership is reflected at the top. And when you see things like Trump holding rallies, or when you see him saying, oh, we're doing well, or if he's picking petty fights over whether or not it's safe to have NFL games, it's just like, it's absurd. It really is.
Yeah, when this first started, I was hoping so much that they would just leave politics out of it completely and leave it up to the actual experts. But that was definitely way too optimistic. I want to kind of, for those who are just jumping in, we're talking to Erick Sanchez. He was the traveling press secretary for Andrew Yang during the 2020 campaign. I want to jump back to kind of the beginning of the campaign a little bit. One of the questions I like to ask anybody who was kind of involved with this thing is, when did you first hear the name Andrew Yang? And also, what was your initial reaction? Were you like, this guy's crazy? Or you're like, hey, maybe he's onto something here,
I have a really great Andrew Yang origin story that I'm very, very proud of, and I think it's pretty funny. So it was June. I guess it was actually straight up maybe a year and a week ago, whenever the Iowa Hall of Fame dinner was, which I think was like somewhere between June 7th and June 9th. At the time, I was advising Tim Ryan's campaign. So every campaign had the option of selecting their entrance music for their candidates. And I think that was maybe one of the first times that candidates were offered this option for a televised media covered event. And so Tim spoke right before Andrew. And I wasn't in Iowa, but I was streaming it at home, basically, observing the speech notes and the applause lines and all those other things. But I picked Old Town Road for Tim, which was at the time the song du jour. So if anything else, I wanted to see how funny that would be, because I felt like, with 27 candidates, I was like, you got to do something kind of weird or wacky. And what was funny was early on in the race, before the debates actually started, I was joking with Tim. I was like, with the debate stage that crowded, you should like wear a piano key necktie or something. So anyway, Tim finishes as he's speaking and I'm taking notes. And then out of nowhere, I hear Return of the Mac. And I look up and I'm like, who is this? And they announce Andrew Yang. And I'm just like, who? And honestly, at the time, I was so blown away with that selection that, I couldn't even hear his speech like mentally because I was still trying to process. I was like, because I knew, I was like, obviously the campaign had to pick that song. So there was like a discussion about which song to pick. And I don't know who in their orbit decided to pick that. So then at least my initial reaction was, this guy's obviously cool enough to allow this to happen. So he's got to have like more fun layers around him. And I think really other folks, at least in the campaign staff orbit, that kind of helped at least propel within the political world his cool appeal and the notion that it's like, oh, I'd love to have a beer with Andrew and all this other stuff, even though he doesn't drink, obviously. But so after that scenario, I started doing some research on Andrew, found out about his book. I spent time with my wife's family over the 4th of July weekend, read the book there. And I was sitting there and just like, I would bug my wife every few minutes because I'm like, gosh, did you know this stat about automation? Did you know this about this? And it was just like, it was hitting me with all these truth bombs and all the history was just so fascinating. And I couldn't stop talking about Andrew's policies, and her uncle was like, if you like the guy so much, why don't you just go work for him? And oddly enough, our organizing director, Zach Fang, on Tim's race ended up going over to the Yang race. And this is as Tim was starting to ramp down his race, obviously dropped out early October, but the timeline on this was like right around September. So I sent Zach an email. And I was just like, look, man, I don't know if you guys, not Grauman, but Zach Fang, I was like, I don't know if you all need any help. Would definitely be interested in the open positions. So then I got put in touch with the campaign. And the two options that were on the table were either me serving as the national press secretary working in New York or traveling with Andrew and the traveling team. And I was like, well, obviously I want to go on this. I want to be a part of that. That seems like way more fun. So, it was a Friday morning. This whole process took probably roughly a week, and I was still waiting to hear back from the campaign. And at that point, I had the buy-in from my wife, who was totally cool with me spending some time in the event that I ended up, getting the position. And it was a Friday morning, right around 7 a.m. I got a call from Matt Shinners, who was the communications director, and he called and he said, "Hey, do you think you could get to Iowa today?" And I was like, yeah, sure. So I got home and I asked my wife, hey, do you mind if I spend the weekend in Iowa? And she's like, sure, go for it. And next thing I know, packed a bag, found a flight for that night. It was severely delayed. I ended up getting to Des Moines, I want to say like at midnight. And I was staying in an Airbnb with Ethan Dunn and with Jeremy Frindle, who is one of our videographers, but they were already asleep. And I remember this Airbnb had a policy where I wasn't allowed to use the elevator after like 10 p.m. because it was disturbed by the residents in this like apartment building. Mm-hmm. So I walked up roughly 6 flights of stairs with my luggage. I was sweating profusely. I get in, all the lights are off in this Airbnb. I don't know who's staying in this Airbnb. And I finally find the room that Ethan described to me. The electricity didn't work. It was like maybe 94 degrees that night. And I didn't sleep at all because I was like, I had this epiphany. I was like, damn, what if Andrew's not what I expected? What if the campaign staff hates me? Like, what the hell did I sign up for? And why did I leave New Orleans? And I didn't get any sleep that night. And then the funniest part, the next morning, we went to the Des Moines Marriott to go pick up Andrew. And, I nervously met him and, I didn't know what to expect. And I remember shaking his hand. I told him that, I guess he didn't hear me succinctly, but I was like, I'm, doing press work for you. But he thought I was a reporter at first for like maybe 10 seconds. And I clarified, I was like, no, I'm a part of your press team. and at that point, I didn't even have a title yet, but I assumed it was going to be in this role, and that started what ended up becoming like my 5 month journey working on the campaign, and I mean, obviously, and I'm sure we'll talk about some of the incredible parts and all the different moving trajectories of that campaign. But it
For
was
sure.
I came on right around the time where the media started actually paying attention to the campaign. Like I was there when CBS decided to send an embed reporter to specifically cover Andrew. I remember when this guy, his name is Ben Mitchell, he introduced himself to Andrew. Andrew was surprised. He's like, "You're here to follow me?" He's like, "Yeah." And then others started showing up, as you noticed, and especially as we got closer to Iowa and New Hampshire, it became a real circus around everything that was going on.
Yeah, I remember. I think when I first saw you on the campaign trail, it was this weird thing right around that time, like you said, when the media was just starting to take him seriously, but elsewhere maybe not so much. And I think it was a reporter was asking about how when he's at the debate, he would talk about 4 billion manufacturing jobs have been lost to automation. And then he would go on to name some of the swing states that Trump won that were hardest hit by the job loss. And but the lady's like, you said that 4 million manufacturing jobs were lost in Iowa, Ohio, Michigan, and Wisconsin. It's not true. And Yang's like, I didn't mean to imply that all those jobs were lost in just those 4 states. I simply list them as examples nationally. And you're standing there behind over his shoulder, and I'm like, this guy must be good. And I will say, just quickly for the audience, every time I always had a question or saw you on the campaign trail, we saw each other almost every day, like in that final month. You're always very attentive and willing to answer my questions, which I always appreciated.
Oh, for sure, man. And honestly, like the services you provided then and still do are all incredibly like invaluable. Being able to document, every piece for folks that didn't have the capability to follow the campaign, or didn't have the ability to kind of see all these different growth points. I mean, we didn't have an infrastructure for it on the campaign. You were the infrastructure for it on the campaign. And so, like, I mean, honestly, too, and as objective as you were in terms of covering what was going on, and also playing that role and fundraising simultaneously. I remember seeing your operation. I was just like, how is he doing all that? How is he wearing so many different hats? And honestly, all I wanted to do was, get out of your way so you could do what you needed to do and get all those pieces together, and so, I mean, we recognize that, and to our part, and to my part specifically, I just wanted to make sure that you had what you needed. But I tell you what, there was not a day where I wasn't just some semblance, and particularly in the early parts. And it's funny because people would point out if they saw me in pictures, they're like, this guy looks really serious. And over time, it took me a while to get up, but it is nerve-wracking. It's like I never got thrown into situations, certainly in my career, where, we would go from event to event and you'd have, a really hungry press crowd come and want, immediate reactions, to things happening. And obviously, I wanted to, my goal was to try and make Andrew as accessible as possible. And I didn't realize this until the Iowa bus tour, but he was the most accessible candidate to the press of any other candidate running during the primary. Even though it appeared, in print and media that other, obviously, and it's not a myth. I mean, it was true. There were other candidates that got a lot more attention. And I know that was a point of frustration for us all. Obviously, there was the MSNBC rub and other points. But in spite of all of that, Andrew was always giving the most amount of time to reporters, more so than any other candidate running with us. And I know this because they told me that, particularly near the end. They were like, you guys were such a joy to work with because you always, let us get what we want and more. And that was obviously driven by Andrew. And there would be times too, where I would try and pull him away And I'm like, all right, obviously our conversation's, exhausted here. And he'd be like, no, please, I'll take one or two more questions and all that stuff. And
that's what you just reminded me of this time in a school in a gym in New Hampshire. Yang had just been playing basketball with some high school kids, and then he did a press gaggle afterwards. And
right.
Zach Grauman was there, and he's like, "All right, one more question, guys." And Andrew does it, and then gets to the point where Zach's like physically trying to pull him away, and Andrew's like, "Nah, I gotta answer more. The reporters are so nice."
Yeah, well,
and so
that was a pleasant scenario. The whipped cream incident was a much less pleasant scenario.
Yeah, and another fun one in New Hampshire is there was one time in an event, and I went to eat dinner at a restaurant nearby afterwards, and I heard people at a table nearby talking about Andrew Yang, so I got all snoopy, and it turns out I recognized them. They had been to like a CBS and an ABC reporter from the previous event, so I of course had to go bother them and talk to them, but I asked them. I was trying to get them to say that they liked Yang, and I couldn't. I was like, well, you gotta, because they're like, oh, gotta be neutral. I'm like, well, you gotta admit that covering Yang's gotta be way more fun than covering Biden, right? And they're like, oh yeah.
The ones that played the reporters that played double duty and covered our campaign and shuffled around to some of the others. I mean, they told me, obviously not naming names, they absolutely had a way better time with us by far.
Yeah, the Yang campaign was the fun one to cover.
Yeah, I distinctly remember we were staying. I can't remember where in Iowa we were. It may have been. It wasn't Waterloo, but our hotel was weirdly attached to a casino that also had like some family fun center thing, and they had indoor go-karts, and Grauman was there, and the rest of us were there. And this was the day that the Bills lost their playoff game, so Zach was in a very, very dour mood, and we had Isaac Duvere from the Atlantic with us as well, and we just made a game time decision to go hit these go-karts. And it's like I saw Isaac in a go-kart, and you could tell he was having a blast. And I was just thinking in my mind, I'm like, I can't imagine this is happening on any other campaign where they're riding go-karts with their traveling reporters. It was funny because certainly I feel like and this is kind of a testament to what I really enjoyed about the campaign. A lot of campaigns, they had a lot of seasoned campaign veterans that all had blueprints that extended a long ways, and they knew how to run presidential campaigns because they had done it before. Whereas for me, Andrew and Tim's campaigns, they were the first I'd ever really truly worked on. I did a little bit of advanced work early in my career, but that was completely different, and I did it for a limited time before I went to the Hill. But I feel like, and I'm sure this isn't the first time you heard it, the campaign in a lot of ways felt like a startup. And you had Grauman who came from the private sector. You had so many other people that came from the nonprofit world that were just drawn towards Andrew's vision and just Andrew's narrative and all those other pieces. And I remember when I was interviewing and I was asked, the question I was asked is like, what would you be doing better than what's already been done? And my answer was honestly nothing, because the fact that you had a guy who had no public profile, had never run for any office before, decides to run for president and gets elevated to this point. I was like, honestly, I have things that, obviously I can apply, but I don't have any rock the boat strategy other than, I just want to work my ass off and continue to perpetuate what's going on.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that approach definitely makes sense. I want to hear if you have any interesting untold stories that occurred during the campaign trail that you'd be able to share with us. And I'm hoping the answer is yes, because you tweeted saying that you had some stories 5 minutes before the show went live. Something juicy, something you can break.
Oh man. Okay. I'm trying to think of at least one that won't get me in any crazy trouble. I just don't want Grauman calling me afterwards.
It's okay. If he does, me and Mark Clock, we're just gonna put more videos of his college movie on Twitter. more clips.
Well, okay. Before I get started, this is not a deflection. If anybody can get that movie in its entirety, I would. Yeah, I can't. What it's called? What was it, Chasing Waters or something?
It's either Chasing Waters or Falling Waters, something like that.
Falling Waters. So when Zach mentioned that movie, and we were on the road from New Hampshire back to New York, he played it down and was like, "I just had this it was a real minor role," and then somebody found the trailer. And he had like 7 lines in it. I was like, I don't think this role was minor at all. I mean, I've heard you throughout most of this trailer, so obviously you had a real significant role. And honestly, if someone can find the footage, I would absolutely host. I would get a big space. I don't know if it'd be in New Orleans or elsewhere, maybe in New York, for a screening of this thing. I would rent out a theater, honestly, for a screening of that movie.
You heard it here first, folks.
So if anybody can track down Zach Grauman's movie, I will absolutely rent a theater out. We'll, do the whole thing up. It'll be fantastic. But in terms of, well, there's a couple of great ones. I feel like one of my favorite ongoing things about Andrew, his tweet, the way that he tweeted, and certainly we saw a lot of like random tweets around the campaign, but on my first day, I remember, what did he tweet? He tweeted a Outkast lyric. I think he may have been like, "I'm sorry, Miss Jackson, I'm for real." And so we were in the car when he tweeted that, and I had my notifications on, so I was sitting right behind him. And I had to ask him, I was like, "Andrew, you just tweeted this Outkast lyric. Like, we're not even listening to the song." And he's like, "Oh, I was thinking about it this morning." And so like, I saw that and he's like, "Oh, I just felt the need to tweet that out." But the best thing was like, the next day, there were a couple of music publications that were kind of like, what was the hidden meaning behind Andrew's tweet? Like, was he placating? Like all this other stuff. And I was like, no, actually he just had a really random thought that popped into his head and he rolled with it. Yeah. And this happened again and this was actually after the whipped cream incident. We were trying to figure out, and I, certainly, we all played different roles, but we also helped cut up the driving. And sometimes I drove, sometimes Zach drove, often Ethan drove. But so, folks were asking, and Zach was like, "Hey man, would you mind driving back to New York?" And I said, "Well, I am a licensed driver." And then my tweet notifications pop up and Andrew just tweeted, "I am a licensed driver." Clearing Waters, by the way, the name of that Oscar snub film. But that's not that. I'm trying to think, and it's funny because I was trying to pull these together. Okay, fine. I'm going to go ahead and go out with it. It's fine. This will be funny. There was a movie concept that Andrew had fleshed out. We were riding through the snow. It was a dark night in New Hampshire, snowy night. Bill Hodder, who is an angel fallen from heaven, was driving us. And we began fleshing out kind of like a horror film concept of a group of Wendigos set out around Iowa. And this was the part that was unclear because we kept fleshing out the plot more and more, where these Wendigos would basically take the form of the candidates, like in kind of like a Men in Black sort of way, but more sophisticated, where like they would possess the candidates. And, at the same time, campaign staff would go missing and other things would take place. And the name of that concept was called Blood Caucus. So a lot of time was spent working through the plot line of this movie that obviously we'll never see a screenplay or any of these. I don't know. I mean, the Yang Gang's creative enough. I'm sure they could probably flesh this out. But I remember we had an event with Marianne Williamson, and she was great. And Andrew pitched the idea to her, and she was definitely just not into it, which is okay. It definitely wasn't for everybody, but I remember he was just really psyched about that idea. And I mean, we got so far. I think, how do you pronounce it? Is it Dankbot?
Yes, I think so.
Okay. And I don't know who Dankbot is, but I appreciate a lot of those meme pieces. I think that Dankbot is sitting on a fictitious poster, and if he has it, by all means, unleash it.
Dankbot has the best memes. Was he the guy who did Erick Sanchez like as a mob boss or like something like that?
Yeah, and he really nailed it. And it's so funny because
that was really good.
I absolutely am the opposite of a mob boss, but it felt cool. It was a Goodfellas, a modified Goodfellas poster. But really, it's like, you know, every day certainly offered something fun and exciting, and you know, certainly there was a lot of it was a hard job. Like we were out doing stuff for I mean, you were with us. Like we were out for like anywhere between 12 to 14 hours on some days.
Yeah.
But you know, one thing that was a testament to Andrew, he never lost his cool. He never got upset. He never demonstrated what I've seen from so many politicians, like especially with the wear and tear of doing a campaign and the stresses that come along with it. You know, it never fazed him, even if something perceivably bad went down on the campaign. I can remember this one time, and you know, this is classic. Like Andrew Yang has the explanation and refuses to fall into the mold of whatever every other candidate would normally do in a situation. So we had a hard time in Nevada, and obviously we never saw what the outcome would have been there because we were already out of the race at that point. But on the conversation with Yucca Mountain, you know, for at least over a decade, every presidential candidate that has come through Nevada, Republican or Democrat, has always said, hey, look, you know, we need to get rid of this. It shouldn't exist, all this other stuff. But Andrew being Andrew, I mean, obviously agreed that it shouldn't exist. But at the same time, the question was posed, like, where does this nuclear waste go? It does have to go somewhere. And we just don't have the options on the table. And like, we were at one forum and he straight up got booed.
I recall the event you're referring to.
Yeah, you remember this one.
Yeah,
and it was kind of unreal because, like, for the most part, it definitely wasn't a nice New Hampshire brewery crowd that was pumped to be there and ask great questions. I mean, they were booing him throughout that session, and afterwards, you know, when he was done, you know, I had expected him in that moment to just be like really upset or something, and I didn't really know how to approach him. And he gets in the car and he lets out the signature Andrew Yang laugh. It was like, ha, ha, ha. He was like, that was such fun. Such fun. That in an essence, like, encapsulates Andrew, and it's just like, it was such a pleasure to. And I, you know, obviously there were good times and bad times, and certainly, you know, we'll get into the bad times as well. But like, you know, I felt like being able to work for someone like Andrew, who's just so unorthodox, especially, you know, for me, and obviously I have a pretty big track record of being working to be creative and working to work with people who appreciate that kind of creativity. And you know, Andrew gave me and anybody else who wanted it the autonomy to be able to build. And, you know, for me, it was interacting with different reporters and producers that I hadn't done before and working toward that. Yeah. So, I mean, obviously, unfortunately, that interview didn't go as at least ended as we had hoped. But at least it was still, he was getting a message out there. And, you know, since the race wrap, it's been great to see, you know, that the reception that he's gotten from different folks as a result. And it's like, you know, even to that extent, you know, late night producers still are eager to bring him on for different events. I'm sure, like, right around the convention, you'll see Andrew appear in different scenarios. So, I mean, it's you know, it's weird that and it's funny because, well, not funny, but I remember Andrew saying, you know, maybe I should have been talking about the pandemic in some ways instead of automation. And given, you know, the circumstance, certainly around, you know, stimulus payments and all those other pieces. And you know, he certainly is. And something I've talked to reporters about is just, you know, taking a look at his staying power and you know, the fact that we have candidates who have adopted the platform and he's issuing endorsements and also being relevant in so many different conversations, ranging from obviously UBI to race relations to being a very significant player this election cycle. My thought would be if we were in this quarantine reality, I feel like Andrew would most certainly be in one of the top 3 surrogates for the Biden campaign right now.
And I've seen even people on cable news say that.
Yeah. And there was a remark, and this was before one of the big cattle calls, as we call them, with all the candidates. And Biden told Andrew, he said, look, if you end up winning this thing, then I'm going to retire. He said, but if I end up winning this thing, then you better be ready to get to work. And if I were in Biden's position, certainly, fingers crossed for victory, obviously. But if that were to take place, I would be hard pressed to think that Andrew wouldn't be seriously considered for a cabinet position. Which one? I don't know, but
yeah, I asked him when I had Andrew on the show what he thought an ideal spot for him would be, and he kind of said the bring back the Department of Technology or something like that, and running that would be ideal. I know Andrew's always just about the best position that's gonna be able to put him in a position to elevate his ideas. So
if Ben Carson can have a cabinet position for as long as he had, Andrew can literally do anything.
yeah, exactly. You brought up the convention, and that's something I've been thinking about lately. Do you think, from your perspective, that Andrew's going to have a speaking spot at the actual convention?
Like 110%.
Okay.
Yeah, I mean, look, you think about all the significant supporter bases, and the Yang Gang is up there, and it's something that certainly we've conveyed over and over again. And it's a testament to the fact that Andrew got along so well with pretty much all the candidates in the race. And I know that Biden really enjoys Andrew, and also, I mean, thoughtfully speaking, it's like Andrew is a rising star in the party. And, on the national scene, of course, as well. But, given that, I don't know at what point or what day he is scheduled to be speaking. And obviously it's now, I guess it's all virtual. So it'll be interesting to see how they end up pulling that together. But yeah, I mean, Andrew's definitely going to have a speaking spot. It's just a matter of where they decide to put him. And since it'll be virtual, it'll be different than conventions past in terms of the energy, like mounting towards who becomes the keynote speaker and all those other things. Unfortunately, I feel like a lot of the fanfare that would come with an in-person convention will be, lost in different ways. Virtual.
It's a little unfortunate. Just when you think of for Barack Obama, his breakout moment was his big 2004 convention speech. But obviously, safety first. But it's like, dang, it would have been. I would have loved to see Andrew go out there to a raucous stadium, electric. It would have been cool.
Well, if for whatever reason things didn't go our way this cycle, that's its own terrifying prospect. But I'm sure that we'd see Andrew have that opportunity not too far along, and hopefully as the nominee in that scenario.
Hopefully, and hopefully he gets to come back out sometime in 2023, early 2023, to return to the MAC and announce his campaign, because I think that'll be like the most fire moment ever.
He can't change the entrance song.
Absolutely not, because it fits better in the second time around than the first time around. That's why.
I actually do have this is a quick one, a funny story. Speaking of music, we did an event, and this was it was like probably the smallest town in Iowa. Maybe it was population 50 or something or whatever.
Wow.
It was, maybe it wasn't that small, but it was. So we had a town hall, and I think maybe 10 to 15 people showed up, which for that area was a significant amount of people. But at the same time, you know, we had this pretty big room and it looked pretty empty. And so the event wraps up, and I mean, people kind of just file out, and, you know, Andrew's signing a couple books, and I'm just kind of standing around the iPod, which controlled the music at the time. And Ethan Dunn comes up to me. He goes, "What are you thinking over here?" And I go, "I kind of want to experiment with something." He goes, "Well, if you're going to do it, this is the event to do it, because it's a small one." So I went on the iPod, went into Spotify, and I picked the Seinfeld theme song for Andrew to walk out to, with like 4 or 5 people streaming out. And I wish I had video footage of it, because it was really one of the funniest things, because, you know, I was waving while the Seinfeld theme song was playing. And I remember afterwards he was like, "Is that the Seinfeld theme song?" I was like, "Yeah." I had to do it.
Yeah.
That was the only time I could get away with that.
Yeah. You mentioned one of the things about how just being on the campaign trail is so hard, and I agree completely with you when you said that the amount of tact that Andrew showed at times, like where all I'm doing really is just holding a camera and like driving around, and I feel like complete crap, and I'm so tired, just physically and emotionally and psychologically.
Yeah.
And I feel like I just want to explode. I'm in like one of those press things trying to film Andrew. He's taking questions from reporters, and they'll ask him something that's just like the question comes off. You can just tell it's like kind of condescending or snarky. And if I were in Andrew's position, knowing that he's actually meeting 1,000 people a day, shaking all their hands, doing all these speeches, interviews, etc. And he just gives the same calm, collected, poised answer that he always gives. He just never.
Yeah.
And that to me was where I realized, like, man, this guy, not only are his policies great, he's actually like physically fit to be president, because that's the type of demeanor you need to have when you're in such a stressful position. And what I wanted to know from you is, being on the communications side, I imagine that's also just a very stressful position. What kind of strategies did you have on the campaign trail in terms of dealing with that stress?
For me, the way, and honestly, it certainly helped to work with folks who were able to collectively keep their cool. But obviously, there were times where that was definitely tested. But at the same time, and I kind of carry this through most of my positions. And I think, you know, certainly for a role like that, you have to remember, at least for me, like, it wasn't about me. And for me, you know, I was fueled off of Andrew's fuel. And, you know, being able to see Andrew handle these situations in different ways so calmly and collectively, you know, it really helped guide that kind of mantra. And, you know, I think in terms of the stress, you know, often political operatives will find themselves turning to things like alcohol and all that other stuff. But you know, we found some interesting de-stressors, especially in New Hampshire. We watched movies a lot. We saw some really great ones. We also saw some pretty bad ones. We went, whoever was traveling for this particular trip, we went and saw the movie Ad Astra, which, I mean, it started with like the first half of it was great, but we all agreed that like the last half was just really bizarre, particularly like the whole plot line with Tommy Lee Jones and all this other stuff. But for some reason, we couldn't stop talking about it. And, you know, that one was interesting. We saw Joker. That was dark. The last movie we saw was Knives Out. And everyone who went to see it said that they loved it, except for me. I was the only person. I was on the opposite side of the fence, and I felt like maybe I wasn't cultured enough for this movie. But that was a de-stressor, certainly. And also, you know, I mean, it was as much rest as we could get, but also just kind of having each other's backs. Like, you know, for the times that, like I mentioned earlier, none of us were too big to do things. Like, I wouldn't mind being a guy that would go out and run sandwiches and, you know, get coffee, even having done other campaigns and all this stuff. We were egoless. And I think that was very helpful, especially in an industry that is not known for being egoless. That's very ego driven. And you see Andrew, who has every reason in the world to be a completely egocentric and all these other things, and he's not at all. And that humility kind of drove its way down. And I think the campaigns you saw that had all this high level drama that went out on the public, that went out into the public via the media, or people who would leak, drama happening within, certain campaigns. In a lot of ways, I think it's driven from the top down, whether it's the principal or who's managing the staff and all those other things. And obviously, the week after, the last week of the race was difficult. The layoffs were a difficult reality for all of us to face. And it was, honestly, that week was one of the most depressing I've had in my career for so many different reasons. It was hard for Andrew, certainly, because, it's hard to see so many people have to get let go. And in some ways, it's a necessary part, but it doesn't make it any easier. And I think at that point, going into New Hampshire, I mean, obviously I always pray for some form of a miracle, but I think it was pretty much written that we were going to be wrapping up, based off of what we saw in terms of the trajectory to victory and all those other things. But yeah, I mean, the day that the layoff stories came out kind of guided a really rocky 48 hours for all of us. But I think the harder part there, not being stressed, but trying to put on a good face around, supporters, keeping Andrew in the zone, because, we're all only human. And it's like, if you're set into a depressing situation, it's hard to cheer up. You can't cheer up anybody when you can't cheer yourself up. And I felt like that was kind of the hard reality going into New Hampshire. And I had a difficult time, certainly even primary night, just trying to mitigate all of my feelings, because, looking around, seeing Mark, seeing so many other supporters, Maria and others that had been around, it's just like, it really sucked. It was really tough. And, a lot of races were like that, but this one hit differently because, it was the first campaign that I worked on that had such a loyal and such an enthusiastic base of supporters that obviously are still around, and we're all still conversing. It's nice being on this end, not being on the campaign anymore, because I feel like I can finally release and enjoy everyone and be able to converse. Whereas in the campaign setting, we're all just trying to do our different jobs and positions and all that. But I will always appreciate Andrew for doing what may have not been popular among the Yang Gang or any faction of the supporter base, but just understanding hey, we had a run. I don't want to waste anybody's money. I don't want to waste anybody's time. I can focus my efforts and do something else, which he's doing today. And really bowed out in the most graceful way, and has been the most productive former candidate as a result. And the thing we got to remind ourselves, Andrew is 45 years old with the whole world ahead of him. He could run for president again, obviously, in 20 or 30 years and still be able to do this. But his ambition and his hustle, obviously.
Be young still.
Exactly. But his ambition and his hustle, that's something that refuses to quit. And I think because of that, he's always going to be a part of the conversation. And, for his part, he obviously doesn't forget the people that, worked and helped propel them from every different level. And everyone's going to be around for the ride, which is fantastic.
Yep. Looking forward towards the future, what do you think the Yang Gang needs to do to be successful? What should our priorities as a movement be going forward, do you think?
I think remaining organized is going to be important. I keep tabs on all the different moving parts, but I love how the Yang Gang has played a role, not just in what touches Andrew's orbit, but what has happened throughout the country, whether it's, the ongoing protests and playing a role in basically myth-busting what goes out on social media. And I think maintaining that level of organization is going to be important. I feel like, for Andrew's next step, certainly, in a scenario where he ran, in 2024, I feel like just keeping that same spirit and faith, and keeping the goodwill and remembering the humanity values is going to be an important part of that.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah, I mean, I think certainly no campaign is perfect, and I think coming off of this one, we all learned some valuable lessons, and that are well documented, that we will apply in the event of another run. And I feel like Andrew will run for something at some point. What it is, I'm not sure, but I think it's been great that like the candidacy endorsed has been supported in different ways by the Yang Gang, whether it's money, phone calls, all the other things. Like, I feel like that was paramount for Jermaine Johnson's victory. He certainly appreciated the help, and I think if you were running for office and align with Andrew from a policy perspective, you'd be crazy not to apply for a Humanity Forward endorsement. Even if it's not for money or any other things, the Yang Gang will have your back.
Yep.
and so I think maintaining that spirit and the positivity, and hopefully, I mean, it is a really difficult time, and I hope that when we come out of this, we're a bit stronger than we were going into it, and use that energy, hopefully, to propel Trump out of office. I mean, I know there's mixed feelings going into this general. I've seen the pleas for Andrew to unsuspend, which, as much as I even would love to see it, it's not a reality.
Yeah,
we can pull off.
It's like, man, it would be so nice, but it's like you kind of just got to look at as you said, the reality of the situation, and recognize it's not really in the cards, unfortunately. But someone did want me to ask you about this new idea that was floated on the Joe Rogan podcast yesterday. Andrew Yang and Admiral William McRaven team up, forming this dynamic dark horse duo to save the Republic. What are your thoughts?
Like, for this, I know we were talking about this a bit ago before we went live. So the concept would be they would team up as a dark horse ticket for this cycle.
Yeah, it would apparently be it's the idea. I guess you take a center, as Brett Weinstein described it, a center left candidate and a center right candidate, and if they were to actually win, they'd well, first of all, for every single major decision they'd do it, they'd be kind of like co-presidents, like an oligarchy almost. And then if they were successful and they were running again in 2024, whoever was president and VP, they would flip roles and run again. So I don't know. It's an interesting idea. It's caught the Yang Gang's attention. I'm certainly all in.
It's an interesting idea. I don't know how one would even go about organizing that. I feel like, on the safe side, I gotta align with Andrew in terms of just working to try and get the Democratic nominee in there. It's just, and this is the thing, and I know it's been hard to get everyone bought into this, and certainly, like, I had an op-ed in the New York Times with Patricia Nelson from our campaign, and Mayor Pete's digital director, in terms of, like, at least demonstrating what our best practices were from our campaign and their campaign, because I feel like between those two campaigns, we both came from a interesting, either know our spot or relatively know our spot, to propel our candidates into certainly different spotlights. But I think that and my hope is that there will be overtures certainly from the Biden campaign to ensure that Andrew has a significant role in this cycle, and he rightfully deserves to have a prime spot at the convention. I think if you were looking at what we managed to pull off and the people that played a role in pulling this off, I mean, you were literally wasting a precious resource if you're not a part of the campaign reaching out to Andrew, reaching out to the Yang Gang, offering up infrastructures. At the very least, where's the Yang Gang for Biden shirt? Which, by the way, Matt, if you want to make one, I feel like it'll do hopefully pretty well. But you know, I just I feel like, and obviously, in a perfect scenario, I would love for, you know, I'd love to still be on the trail with Andrew and Zach and everyone else. I'd be really tired, and I actually, when I came home, everyone started noticing how much gray hair I ended up having, and I didn't recognize it until I finally started looking. But I'd probably be pretty haggard at this point if we were still moving forward.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, it's you know, unity is difficult for so many different reasons, and certainly we're not the only campaign supporter base. Now, I think because of the amount of enthusiasm and collaboration and humanity that we exhibit as a supporter base, we probably project and amplify a lot more than some of the other candidate supporters. Certainly, I mean, we have a lot of young energy, a lot of young enthusiasm, and a lot of, you know, creative enthusiasm surrounding it. So, you know, my hope is that that'll be something that the Biden campaign really embraces, brings together, and helps unify us. And, you know, like I said, if for whatever reason we don't see November turning out in the direction where we oust Trump, it'll be a really rocky time, you know, dealing with a second Trump term. But also, you know, I would be hard pressed to think that Andrew wouldn't be working to formulate, you know, the next presidential campaign.
Mm-hmm. Shortly after Yang endorsed Joe Biden, which some of the Yang Gang, it was a very controversial decision to summon the Yang Gang. Many were surprised, but you tweeted, I've seen mixed reactions from the Yang Gang over a few things this weekend. Let me be abundantly transparent. Andrew Yang isn't becoming part of the establishment. He's taking it over.
Taking it over.
Yeah. What did you mean by that exactly, I guess? And how do you think he is progressing in taking over the establishment?
I think and at that point in time, we were seeing a lot more activity. And that was, I want to say that was before COVID took hold.
Yeah, it's like right at the start, I'd say. Yeah, I think it was April 5th.
Absolutely. And so one of the things in regards to the endorsement, and I remember, you know, that when that endorsement was issued, unlike some of the other endorsements filing in, Andrew looked at, you know, the trajectory for victory in terms of delegates and all those other pieces, and just made it, once again, a really calculated evaluation, and it ended up, you know, being correct. But, you know, I remember going on Twitter, and I know there was a lot of, I don't want to say hostility, but at least, you know, mixed feelings. Which, you know, rightfully so. At that point, the campaign had been suspended for a couple months. And yeah, I mean, I think there were a lot of Yang Gang folks who had Bernie as a second option for sure. And I can see that playing out, particularly because of the progressive ideologies that they both shared. At the same token, though, you know, I feel like some of the critiques that were leveraged in Andrew's direction were a little uneven, and just kind of looking in the background of how much you see certainly establishment electeds, like we saw Senator Warner having a conversation with Andrew about UBI, and this was all coming from their part over Andrew. You know, we were approached at one point by Senator Ed Markey, who I don't know that we've scheduled it yet, but there's a conversation, at least in talks, about the two of them having a similar conversation about UBI. I feel like a lot of these things, and also, you know, obviously Tim Ryan inviting Andrew to testify in Congress, which will hopefully happen very soon. You know, seeing all these different pieces and observing Andrew on the trail and seeing the amount of goodwill that he was able to capture. I mean, like, I can think of so many different photo-friendly moments of Andrew and Kamala hugging and him just being playful with some of the other candidates. That reception that he was getting didn't just stop after he was suspended. In fact, it changed. I mean, after the race was done, every single candidate called Andrew, and it wasn't, you're very run of the mill, you ran a good race, this, that, and the other. They were jonesing for his endorsement. And Andrew, for his part, wanted to see how things played out. And once he saw that it got to a point where mathematically things were falling into Biden's direction, that was pretty much his basis for that. And working on the CNN commentator line, I wasn't surprised that they brought that question up to him. But I mean, I for his part, he was just looking at things the same way that he looked at his own race, where it was like, I don't have a trajectory for victory. So after, we wrap up this primary state, it's time to bow out. And I think he looked at the rest of the race closely and with that same mindset. But yeah, I think in a large way, he's going to play a significant role in how the party is shaped. I think in the same way that Bernie did when he shook things up in 2016, in a lot of ways, Andrew shook things up in 2020. And I mean, I think, the fact that he's starting to build a coalition of current and new electeds that are, carrying his torch, so to speak, but he gets to carry it along with him too. And as that coalition builds, I mean, we're just a force that's not going to, that can't be ignored in the same way that Bernie 2016 and his base, it still can't be ignored to this day. I think, our brand is up there just as much as Bernie's in terms of, who the party needs to keep in mind as they're making decisions. And that's why I inherently think that Andrew's put himself in a position based off of the right ideas and obviously timely given everything that's going on. Right before we hopped on, I saw a reporter from The Hill tweet about the fact that Andrew is right, because I think there's like a potential of Ohio and Indiana testing out autonomous trucks across their states. And, that reporter was like, Andrew Yang was right. And I keep hearing this over and over again.
Yeah.
And it's like, well, after so many times of hearing Andrew's right, it's like, okay, well then, I make sure that he gets the respect that he's been commanding since he started. But we've come a long way since Andrew got laughed at for giving families money directly.
Yeah.
I think we could say that for sure.
We really have. And just from the supporter side, it's been pretty fascinating to see the number of different people that Andrew or Humanity Forward's been involved with, whether it's Hillary Clinton, of all people, tweeting out the link to Humanity Forward, or Kim Kardashian putting it on her Instagram. It's just like, wow, like that's huge. And you'd mentioned the Biden thing, and I personally, like, I never really subscribed to the idea that it was some sort of like calculated political move. If you just looked at it, when Klobuchar and Beto and Pete endorsed Biden, it was a rally. It was like this planned thing. Yang, it's literally just sitting on a CNN panel. Anderson's like, "Yo, what are you thinking, Andrew?" And he's like, I think Biden's gonna win. So hereby, I'm endorsing.
And then the cryon went up, and it just like. But in the aftermath, obviously there wasn't this big calculation or a backdoor deal that happened of some sort. And certainly, directly after Andrew, hey Heidi, how's it going? There wasn't any type of deal forged. Certainly, again, the conversations were had, but none to the extent of like Andrew basically selling his endorsement, for an opportunity.
Yeah.
And honestly, that's not something he needs to do. I think that his work ethic, his ideology coming into the mainstream, trajectory, which he was able to poise himself and run a campaign without any political experience. I mean, it would be dumbfounding for me to see, the Biden campaign or the Biden transition team or the Biden administration existing in a way that will be most beneficial to the American people without Andrew Yang playing a part.
Mm-hmm. Sasha wants to know, Eric, you have my lucky numbers on your hat. What do the numbers stand for?
So I've had this hat for a while before I had a math hat, which I gave to a friend of mine here. So I was looking for it and now I can't find it. But so this is, I bought this as kind of my own alternative to the MAGA hat as a nod to the Obama administration. The last time we had a Democratic presidency. So like, as soon as Andrew, occupies the Oval Office here soon, I hope we can have his number on a hat and do all that fun stuff too.
Interesting. Yeah, and I want to say Eric inspired me to rock the math hat today since he told me he was going to be wearing a cap. So
yeah, it was mostly for bad hair on my part.
It's okay. Nobody's been able to get a haircut in a while, so expectations are pretty low. I do think it appears that it does seem more likely than not that Andrew's going to run for president at some point in the future, whether it's in 2024, 2028, or whenever. And if he does, what I want to know, and I think what a lot of Yang Gang wants to know, do you think that you would be working for the campaign? And if so, and even if not so, what advice would you have for a future Yang presidential run, just based off of your very comprehensive knowledge of what went on this time around?
Right. Well, to answer the first question, I've already kind of committed myself to doing whatever Andrew Yang wants me to do. I'm very much, if Andrew asks me to jump, I will ask him how high. So no matter what, I mean, I'm plugged in. I've been around for the cause for humanity forward, but I can't think of anyone I would take a bullet for Andrew Yang in a heartbeat. And he knows that, obviously. But in terms of, the next run, obviously, I think we're gonna start from a much better place than Andrew started his last.
Absolutely.
Yeah. If he has to launch his campaign again and is in a 16-passenger van with Zach driving, then we obviously we shouldn't be running. But I think, given what we built and what he's continuing to build, we're going to have a bigger infrastructure. We're going to have, more sophisticated roles that really speak to a lot of different things. And even, one of my own criticisms about we kind of, ran things a little bit ad hoc, certainly in the communications department. I mean, we built some really great opportunities, but I feel like in the next go around, things are going to be a bit more polished, but in an organic way, if that makes any sense. Like, we won't have to reinvent the wheel, but we'll just be able to make it more efficient, which obviously is something that Andrew prioritizes. So like, I'm sure that he's taken a lot of time just thinking about what he appreciated and what he had wished gone differently. And obviously we could not have anticipated Iowa being the crapshoot it ended up being. But, to that extent, I think it's just, there'll be a lot more priority in terms of activating the Yang Gang again, but leveraging their skill sets and the things that people do best. Whether it's having the macho engage hard again. Now, here's the question. Would you rebuild and go back on the road and do the fundraising?
I'm ready. Day one. Day one, I'm coming in.
Okay.
Way better gear too. Our quality's going through the roof next time around.
Well, I mean, it was already great. I just, I think that going into a second Yang race, it's going to be a lot more. There'll be a lot more focus on activating the grassroots functions to work, and making sure that the people who are in leadership positions respond effectively to what the Yang Gang is hoping to see in different parts. And I think, making sure that those interactions run as smoothly as possible. That'll be a big part of what we want to see from another campaign. I thought we did a pretty great, we did a job to the extent that we could. And, no matter what, we were always understaffed and we were all overworked.
Yeah.
But I think, looking at another race, we can strategically say, hey, let's put more infrastructure into our field operations so that, our supporters have an easier way to engage with the campaign, whether it's, being on the field in the ground. I was super impressed to see all the organic ways that it happened on their own. And like, even today, things, like the Yang Gang Book Club, where I did a takeover recently, and, seeing all the different media structures that have been built. I mean, I just think that in a second Yang run, we will have so many more assets that'll really put us at a much more competitive circumstance. And certainly the drumbeats of things like the unsuspend movement and the idea that was brought up on the Rogan experience. It's like, it's clear, I just feel
the energy is still there. Yeah.
The energy is still there. I mean, our surrogates were pretty freaking awesome. Like Chappelle, Donald Glover, people who had never engaged in the political process that Andrew was able to rally up to do so. I mean, I think it's only going to be greater next time. And to see that to effect and to be able to leverage better opportunities, but, not to rock the boat so we don't keep that essential essence where everyone feels like they have a stake. And, that was Andrew driven. And I know for a fact, I mean, based off of all the engagement that he continues to do, and the recognition that he places, he would much rather be on a Mad Show than he would be on a late night show, quite frankly. And that's a testament to the fact that he doesn't forget the people who, helped him get where he got. And even if it appears that way in a decision or other things, and you'll see his tweeting about, we've seen his tweets about this before, how he will acknowledge at certain points that he's always evolving and looking for guidance and all that stuff. And I think it's great how the Yang Gang will always offer the opinion, that it's just not one big Kool-Aid drinking faction that will run in a direction, because we see what happens on the Trump side when that happens. It's like, I mean, he's literally eating his base off of a hill. I mean, he's putting their health at risk, so obviously he didn't give a shit. But, Andrew's the opposite. He's very much, obviously he has his own sets of ideals, his own opinions, but he is open for criticism, and he takes it really well. And, when he feels like he falls short, he will evolve and get to a point that isn't there to placate, but really to help move things forward. And that's another thing that I've always appreciated about.
Yeah. Eric, we've really appreciated you coming on today and sharing your insight, your stories, answering these questions. We have one big last one. The biggest question, the key question that people want to know when it comes to slogans. Andrew Yang, he of course has math. Zach Grumman, he was lucky enough to be given big coat guy by Stephen Colbert. What would your campaign slogan be if you were to run for president?
If I were to run for president, I think my slogan would be, let's get our shit together.
I like it. I like it.
Collectively, as a country, as a country, as anything, that would be my campaign slogan. Erick Sanchez, whatever year, let's just get our shit together.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Eric, if you do run, I'm on board. The whole chat's on board. We're all, we really appreciate you coming on, and you're always welcome back on at any time.
Hey man, I'm
you're gonna be involved with this thing for a long time, so we're gonna be here for you.
Well, it's truly an honor, man. And anything you need, anything anybody needs, I'm here for it.
Absolutely. All right, everybody. Happy Friday night. Have a good weekend. Make sure you go to Fouch on the Couch. Did I say that right? Yeah, FouchOnTheCouch.com. Get your merch. The proceeds go to a good place. All right. Take care, everybody.
Take care, everyone.